Welcome to the final installment of our Fundamentals of Future Planning series, Creative Options for Home, Exploring Individualized Housing Options. I'm Anna Bruno, and I'll be your host tonight. Before we start, we have a few housekeeping issues to address. We'll be holding a Q&A after the presentation, so feel free to post a comment or question at any time in the chat box, and we'll get to them at the end. Like all of the webcasts in the series, we have prepared a digital booklet to support the presentation. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, you can access it with the booklet tab. Like our other sessions in the Fundamentals series, we'll be providing an opportunity to gather with a small group of other families on Zoom a week from tonight. You can register for that using the Discussion Groups tab. And lastly, please share your thoughts on tonight's presentation through the Feedback tab. We really appreciate your thoughts. I don't need to tell you how complicated it can be to come up with and create an individualized housing plan. When you first think about it, it seems overwhelming. We all know the exorbitant cost of real estate these days, the challenges with finding the right supports, and the long wait lists, and on and on. But the reality is many families are thinking outside the box and crafting individualized housing plans, working with community partners, and they're setting their sons and daughters up in their own homes using a patchwork of resources and creative ideas. No one who has been through it will say that it's easy. It takes time, a lot of research and resources, but the right professional guidance and personal support, and often a little bit of luck, it's definitely doable. Plan for this evening is to examine 3 different individualized housing options and to identify the steps each family went through to create a home for their loved one. We'll examine how they came up with the option they did, how they figured out support needs, how they managed the logistics, and we'll approximate a financial plan for each option. For privacy reasons, we won't share personal information, but we will offer financial models that could apply to similar housing situations. Joining me now is Kelly Casey. Kelly is a facilitator and planner specializing in supporting people with disabilities and their families in developing individualized housing plans. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Anna.
You have supported quite a few people and families over the years in developing individualized housing plans. I would imagine it's pretty exciting for you and the family, but also pretty terrifying for people themselves when they move into their own home and for the first time.
Yes, I always think the families and the person are so brave. It's a real big chance they're taking, and it's interesting to see how successful they sometimes turn out, or most of the time turn out.
Yeah. I mean, I would think that once people are settled and the person gets used to making all their own choices and having their own space, that part is quite exciting.
Yes, it's actually really neat seeing people thrive when they do have the opportunity to thrive in their own space with the right supports at the right time. You see people literally transform. I have seen such jumps in people's skills, abilities, and them finding their own voice. It really is nice to see and very motivating.
Fantastic. I mean, we want to hear those success stories. But overall, I mean, it's a great big step, and I know that families might be scared or wary of making that leap.
Yes, they are, but we really start slowly. We start at the very beginning where we talk about, you know, in a perfect world, what would your life look like? We start dreaming and visioning and trying to figure out what that space looks like and what their community and life would look like.
Right. So you use the word vision, and we talk about vision a lot. In fact, we've talked about it in this webcast series. What sort of things do you help people to think about or envision in terms of their housing plan?
So one of the first things that I always say is the house is more than just a home. It's your community, it's who you are. And so really we start with who the person really is and what their strengths and gifts are and what they see and what they like to do, so their interests as well. So in a perfect life, if you enjoy walking and being around the hustle and bustle of you know, downtown streets, the last thing you'd want to do is look at moving a person to a community where there wasn't that, you know, sensory feedback and everything else that goes along with the city.
Right. So it's very tailored to the individual person. It's not just plopping someone into a home, it's understanding who they are.
Absolutely not. Yes, it really is about the person, and everybody's plan is very, very different.
So Kelly, what else would you recommend people think about when they are creating their initial vision?
Well, I think that visioning is difficult to do in the sense that we're always trying to think in baby steps and realistic. But when I talk about visioning, I say go big or go home. It really is about, you know, in a perfect world, what would it look like? So stay positive. Let's look at all of the possibilities. Let's look at your natural connections and community. And, you know, there will be blips in the road, and having that team and that network of support and friendship to support you through those blips and looking at all the options is absolutely essential.
Yeah. It's easy for us ourselves to limit our ideas so quickly, right? We think that something's not possible. And so it's important in that visioning phase that we allow for opportunities to be present and not discount them right away.
That's right.
And I really like how you talk about going back to your network and the people involved in your life, because those people can help us dream bigger than we sometimes can dream for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes it's a network that inspires the person and the parents to take that leap of faith. When they might be more hesitant and less of a risk taker, there's usually one person on the network that's very positive and comes up with great solutions and ways to make it happen.
Fantastic. So, Kelly, before we get into the profiles, I just wanted to talk a little bit about individualized options. What are some of the models people have considered previously?
Well, there's a whole bunch of options that have been considered with families, and it really, again, is based on who they are and what the reality is in terms of their resources and opportunities within their own community. So some of the options that I have seen being really successful is, as a first step, we always quite often see a secondary suite within the home as the first step. And that likely is because of a little bit of a fear of trying something new and different, and the safety of the home for the person and knowing what to expect for the families, and being able to have a lot more oversight if it is within a home and a secondary suite within the home. So that's a very common first step for people to take. We also see a lot of people looking at renting apartments, and that has the ability to be a little bit more flexible. It's only a one-year commitment. If people really aren't ready for that, I sometimes suggest Airbnbs. So finding one or two friends and renting an Airbnb for a couple of days with a few friends, and with the right support at the right time, to test out what it would feel like to be on their own and see whether or not those friends are the right matches. We see sometimes people purchasing homes and condos, and you'll see a situation today that we talk about that, but I've seen other families sell their home and downsize themselves as aging parents and buy a condo, and then buy a second condo in the same building. And that has been a trend that I've seen more and more of also. And that's because a person can develop their own community within the condo long before the mom or dad passes away. And so they have those connections already there, the routines, the expectations, etc. So that has become a very popular option as well. Live-in caregivers, having an anchor, I call it an anchor in the space, is always good. Some people like live-in caregivers. Some people don't enjoy having somebody within their space. So you could also look at a live-in caregiver living in the same apartment building and being subsidized the rent, rather than living in the same space and using technology to request the support when the person needs that support. I also see roommates, and roommates don't only have to be peers. It could be, friendly housemates or people who are attending university in Toronto and are doing an internship, for example, close to town and need a space to stay. So that's an option as well. And a final one that I've seen more and more of, because of the legislation in the province, is secondary suites. So we know that the province and cities are looking at ways to solutions to the housing issues. And because of those solutions, there is legislation that is drawn out provincially, and each municipality has to implement it in their own way. So for example, in Simcoe, you've seen the secondary units being actually subsidized by the town of Simcoe.
Oh, interesting. Kelly, you've given a lot of options that I've seen situations of, but also some new ideas that I hadn't thought of before. So thank you for kind of opening up the various possibilities that might be there for people. Well, we're going to move into looking at actual circumstances. So while we weren't able to actually visit and record people in their homes as we would have liked to, we did have a number of parents step up and share their stories remotely. As I mentioned, we have 3 different individualized options to share and discuss. First is Erwin, who joins us over the phone to discuss the home they set up for their daughter, Karen. Karen was living in Montreal with her parents and 2 sisters who lived in Toronto. Several years ago, Erwin and his daughter felt it would be best for Karen to move closer to her family, and was excited, and she was really excited about the idea. While there was no residential support or suitable programs available, they got some help planning and got creative and did it on their own. The solution they came up with was a 3-bedroom apartment in an older building in Toronto. The idea being they would bring in a living caregiver and would split the cost by finding a roommate who also needed some support.
We proceeded to move Karen here. She was living with me for a while we were trying to get some pieces together. And the pieces involved getting an apartment, furnishing it with all the utilities, finding an appropriate caregiver, and then it was a 3-bedroom apartment that we were able to obtain. And so it was the idea of getting another person who needed some supervision into the apartment. Karen has been in the apartment now for, well, I say close to 3 years. And the other individual is there, joined about half a year later. We actually were looking for another caregiver, and it was through the other party that was who had their child in the apartment, who used an agency to find the current caregiver. The current caregiver had just come. Actually, she again was for the Philippines, but she had been working in Israel. Actually, we had actually checked with a call there to the people she had worked with there, and they recommended her very highly. I mean, they said they couldn't say enough good things about her. So we hired her, and she's been with us for about a year and a half now, and she's excellent. Well, the caregiver is paid. She's paid regular salary on the basis of since both of them were actually out of programs from 9 to 4. She really her activity with them was getting them ready to get breakfast and getting them out in the morning. So a couple hours in the morning, and then she really was free from about 9 or shortly after 9 to late afternoon, till say 3:30 or 4 o'clock, and took over from there. I split the apartment, utility, and caregiver expenses with the other party. That's split down the center. The caregiver is new to the country, so whereas we had other people coming in on the weekends that I would pay for, she's staying the weekends usually, and the only time that what happens between my two other daughters and myself is we pick up Karen on Friday for dinner, and she sleeps over at one of our houses. And then she goes back on Saturday, noon or around there. So that's a regular activity that happens every week. So she spends some time with the family at dinner, overnight, and that works out that way. Well, we've talked about that, in fact, early on in the arrangement. So in the event that one party or the other finds that the arrangement is not working, or there's some reason for a change, we have said, and we have kind of an agreement which was actually monitored through Zoe at Lights, that we give each other a minimum of 3 months of notice before we make any changes. I also have, since the apartment lease is under my name, also if we pull out of the apartment for any reason, they have the assurance that they will take over. I'll let them take over the lease, because these apartments, particularly 3 bedrooms in that area, are virtually impossible to find. So we don't want to lose that apartment. But so far, the actual arrangement is working out very well, and the other party, the other family involved, are excellent, and we really coordinate things very, very nicely, and that's really been a big plus.
Wow, that seems like a really well thought out kind of collaborative scenario. What did you think, Kelly?
They were a fabulous family to work with, very close knit. All the siblings were actually the ones that started instigating this with Erwin, the father. So they had a lot of natural connections within their community. Some of those natural connections were helped them leverage where they are today. So really the apartment was through a connection from the family, quite inexpensive compared to other apartments in that area, and quite large. As well as the caregiver. The live-in caregiver was through a connection of somebody to find the right agency to pull in the right person to work with them. So connections are everything, and working with your network is everything.
Right. Definitely. It wouldn't have happened without those, I can't imagine. Maybe you could speak to some of the strengths that you find that are particular to this model.
So one of the biggest things is flexibility. Because it's a rental, there is an opportunity to jump in and out as needed. The families did build a contract in, which allowed them 3 months to inform the other person, which is a safeguard that protects them both from any kind of disruption in their life without the appropriate amount of time to plan. The other piece of the other benefit is the cost of a live-in caregiver is quite a bit less than having many different support people come in. And it reduces the amount and potential for somebody just not to show up. So although there's a huge amount of management with any model, a live-in caregiver model does have a little bit less of those uncertainties day to day, because the person is living there. And the cost to a live-in caregiver on average is about $46,000 a year. You have to have a really good contract in place, but it is something that is very financially feasible, especially if you're sharing the cost between 2 people.
So Kelly, I think what people will want to know is understanding the financial breakdown of a model like this. I wonder if you could walk us through that.
Sure. So really, when you look at a space and a person, the biggest thing is the rent and the support costs. So when you look at rent for the average person living in Toronto for a 3-bedroom, you're looking at about $2,400 a month. And that would be, in this case, divided by 2 people. And the cost of a live-in caregiver is about $46,000 a year, which in total, if you look at this as a monthly cost, is about $5,000 per month for each of them to kind of have their roof over their head and the support that they need. If you go a little bit further, though, most of these individuals that we talk about also have ODSP funding, which is the income on a monthly basis, as well as passport. And so if you take out the person's ODSP and passport, it brings it down by about $1,600 per month. So you're looking at about $3,400 per month out of pocket for these families to start trying to figure out where can we get this funding. And I have other tips to go there as well.
Yeah, so where else can families get the extra funding, or other creative ideas that they could use to bring that number a little bit closer to what's more feasible?
Absolutely. So if you start at the bigger program area, you'll look at the first step is always to apply for subsidized housing. Each area has a subsidized housing list, and even though these individuals may not want to live in the units that are subsidized housing, they have access to something new called portable housing. So it's Federal Ontario Portable Housing Grant. And that would allow them to receive $500 over and on top of their ODSP to put towards rent, to pay directly to a landlord. So right away, that's a $500 savings. Another vehicle that we use quite often is maximizing resources across the sectors. So we're not only dependent on one sector, MCCSS, and being on the DSO waitlist, but all citizens in the province of Ontario can access municipal health funding. Municipal health funding in this specific situation, and for most people that we support in this sector, they have access to something called the LIN support, which normally is a person coming to your home, a PSW coming to your home, helping you with your self-care, etc. On average, I see people get about 7 hours of that a week. Some people get up to 21 hours of that a week, but on average, we're looking at 7 hours a week. Individuals don't have to have the person coming to the door. They can instead ask for something new since the Accessibility Act came through in 2018 called Family Managed Healthcare. Family Managed Healthcare would give them direct funding in lieu of a person knocking on their door. And they could use that money to pay for whatever support staff they chose to provide that support. So 7 hours translates to about $13,000 per year of direct funding that's deposited into their account on a quarterly basis, much like passports, except it's a reconcilable program versus a reimbursable program. So those are two quick, fast tips, but there's a lot of other little tips, like finding the right provider for internet. You know, if you call and you let them know that you have a disability, you do get a reduced rate. There's all sorts of other little tips that we have.
Sure. And this is where people's financial planning that they've done all along comes into play. It's also where someone's personal employment might really help. If someone, like Karen or someone in that situation had their own income from some small employment, that those things would all help bring down the cost. I think what's important about what you've outlined, though, is that people need to stay connected and informed about what other cost-saving measures there might be, because those things are going to change from time to time, too.
They do, absolutely, they do. There's always new opportunities, though, so stay connected.
So we're just going to take a quick look back to Erwin. He has a few final thoughts about this particular model.
Well, you know, I have the concerns because, as I mentioned before, it does require some supervision and somebody to be there. And if she's got to get to, for example, doctor's appointments, the caregiver can take her, but often it's a matter of picking her up or picking them up, and you know, the normal things, the dentist's appointment and all that type of thing. So it does require involvement. So there has to be someone around who can be contacted or who's involved or is kind of monitoring the situation. So that's the only thing that bothers me.
So really, this is where you see the role of a third party come into play. Management of any of these models is overwhelming, and unless you have the right knowledge, connections, and time, it does, and it would not be sustainable. So my recommendation to any family is, even though you have a plan, even though a plan's implemented, pull in a third party called a facilitator who is trained, knowledgeable, knows all the new opportunities in the community, to kind of keep things going and almost be the anchor to the plan, maintaining that circle of support, connecting them to new opportunities in their community, and supporting the staff supports that might be involved as well.
Right, so that facilitator piece could be really helpful in eliminating some of the stress around any of the models that we might be talking about tonight, as well as potentially thinking about a more formal structure like a microboard or something like that.
Absolutely. We could talk about microboards a little bit later because I know there's another family coming in.
Right, and hopefully people who've been watching the series have also had a chance to learn about microboards in the context of our complete series, which is why it's been such a pleasure to do all of it in stages.
Nice, perfect.
Why don't we take a look now at the next profile? This one is with Sandra and Vito, who purchased a 3-bedroom condo for their daughter, Emily, north of Toronto. Their plan is similar to Erwin and Karen's in that they have a space for a living caregiver and roommate who could share in the expenses. It's all relatively new for the family as Emily moved into her condo only 5 months ago. Let's take a look.
So Emily's 25 years old. She's a social, interactive, fun-loving, busy person who enjoys being with others.
She has cerebral palsy. She's in a wheelchair, so she has mobility issues, and her care is all-encompassing. She can't feed herself. She can't move herself. So her care is very, very all-encompassing. We looked at a house versus a condo apartment, and saw the pitfalls in a home being its care, and making it accessible. Whereas a condo building or an apartment already has most of the accessibility features built into it that it needs. So it became for us about location. Also, Emily lives about 15 minutes away from us now. So that was an important consideration, that we still wanted to be part of Emily's life. So then we also looked at newer versus older buildings. Older buildings have, the apartments are much bigger as a general rule of thumb. So we ended up with a 3-bedroom apartment, around 1,400 square feet. We only had to modify the bathroom and put a Hoyer lift in the bathroom and in Emily's bedroom for now. We also decided at the beginning for the first 6 months to a year that it would only be Emily and the live-in caregiver. There is a 3rd bedroom for a second person. And we thought that, you know, two people with a live-in caregiver was manageable, and also very good socially and more cost effective.
Right.
And also speaking socially, a condo building just naturally allows for movement and activity, and that's Emily to a T. She likes even just watching people. And we've been fortunate enough to have a building, we didn't know this at the beginning, whose superintendent makes it his mission to make sure Emily smiles when he says hello, and a lot of very kind social people who are saying hello to her. So that was comforting as well. So the caregiver has been in Emily's life since she was quite young, in her single digits. Yeah, I don't really remember. But yeah, so she's been part of the caregiver. She's played that role for many years, and she's done various parts. Like, she's gone away to camp with Emily, so sleepovers at camps. We've had her sleep over at our house. We've had Emily sleep over at her house. So for us, yeah, it wasn't as challenging. And she's been trying to do this herself with numerous families. It just never took to fruition. And when we had this idea, she was just the first ask. So no, it wasn't hard, but it would definitely be the harder part of this component, I think.
So legally, we had to think about a contract for the live-in caregiver. We also have a service provider providing us with some night PSW and then another service provider through Lynn that we have to deal with. So all of those contractually need to be dealt with. And when we sat down with our legal people, they sort of guided us to set up a not-for-profit to take care of Emily's care, because we aren't going to live forever, and you know, the odds are Emily will outlive us, so we need to have a separate entity taking care of Emily. And we also do have a son who's 21 who is part of that not-for-profit board.
Yeah, so eventually, yeah, setting it up in that it sort of, I mean, the transition of us not being here won't cause any sort of real grief, hopefully. That the micro board will already, I mean, it's just us right now, but we're hoping to sort of
Add to it.
as we go along.
You really need to set, in my opinion, if you don't set it up properly and you're trying to save a few dollars along the way, you're making a mistake.
Okay, so we're in the honeymoon stage still.
Yeah, it's been 5 months. Yeah.
In that we're kind of like, oh, this freedom that we're experiencing is, well, it's liberating. It's very liberating, despite the fact we're in a pandemic.
Yeah.
So yes, there's some comfort in knowing that she's taken care of. I mean, it's 5 months in. There's a lot of things to be ironed out, but it's very liberating to have, well, she's full-time care, so.
Yeah. And then Emily has sort of been surprising, as a normal 25-year-old would be so thrilled to have their own place. She is totally thrilled to have her own place. So that's made it a lot easier on us to see that
she's okay. Yeah.
She's really thriving with her independence.
So Kelly, I love Emily's story here, and it's still really brand new, so they must be lots to figure out.
You know what? There's so many more opportunities here, and the family was just so lovely to work with. They were one of the families that we worked with, and within, a couple of weeks after the workshop and the planning workshop was over, jumped and took that leap of faith and just did it. So that's not to say there wasn't a lot of pre-planning ahead. So preparing Emily for this meant, a lot of respite, out of home options in the past, living with a caregiver in the past. They knew the caregiver ahead of time, so they had natural connections again. So they really took advantage of preparing Emily through opportunities in life, skill building, trying new things, and also their natural connections, which was great. They still do have the vacancy there, in terms of an extra room. So they're actively looking for the right person, and they're open to looking to even to housemates, friendly housemates. So students coming closer to the city to do their internships, or first time away from home, etc.
Right. So you mentioned that model earlier, where someone could have a student living there for a reduced cost or something and provide some support. And you're right that their planning began a long time ago, that they knew that this was a vision that Emily would live on her own, and that they needed to prepare for that in some way.
Absolutely.
One of the other things that I thought was really was different in this scenario than in Erwin's and Karen's story was that they purchased a condo. Can you speak to that a little bit and how that might make a difference?
You know what? For the family, it was the right thing to do because of the means to do it. And it was a permanent and is a permanent solution for Emily. So it made more sense for them to purchase. And purchasing a place versus renting a place brings a different feel. All of a sudden, when you're purchasing one of the new owners in a condo building, you are part of the new community and people are curious. So since they moved in, what I found when I visited was the amount of people in her life who were curious and already, talking with Emily and having conversations was wonderful. They have a great, what I call a connector, but who is the maintenance guy in the building. He has a naturally outgoing personality, is a natural connector, and really sets a tone for the building. So Emily has been welcomed greatly into that community. And that has and is probably what I see as the biggest difference between renting something and owning something. We know that people who own are there for the long haul. When they're renters, we have a tendency not to put ourselves out there as much, and other people don't put themselves out there as much either.
Right. So it's really giving Emily a place to put down her roots.
Yes. Yeah. And close to her natural places as well. So it was a very well thought out plan.
Fantastic. Why don't we go back to Sandra and Vito for a final clip on their thoughts.
Do what's right for you now. So it doesn't mean that if you choose something, you can't undo it. You can always go back and try a different model. We all make mistakes. So that would be do your research, be diligent about that, and then just go for it.
So Sandra and Vito really took a leap of faith here and just jumped right into the opportunity that was in front of them, knowing that there would be things to figure out, but the positive attitude that they could do it.
Yes, I think personality plays a big role in this, and I think the resilience in knowing that everything is attainable in the sense that, you know, problems will arise, like we spoke about earlier, and you just have to chip away at each problem as they come along and not feel overwhelmed by the big picture. So if you break it down into steps, which we often do with people, then it feels a little bit easier to manage. So one step at a time, we can all move forward together type thing.
So in this third scenario, we have Earl and Carol and their son, Jonathan. Earl and Carol were thinking outside the box when they came up with a plan for their son. In the end, they ended up with a single property with two separate buildings, a home for them and a separate home for Jonathan, and a live-in caregiver on a home share agreement. Let's take a look at their story.
Yeah, well, we have a son, Jonathan. He's 32 years old. He has autism, and we've learned a lot through Jonathan. He's very, very outgoing, loves to be sociable with people. And he was kind of telling us from a little bit earlier on that he wanted independence and to be with other people besides mom and dad. So that gave us a clue that we should start planning. We just knew that we didn't want to have Jonathan in a group home. We knew he'd be very unhappy there. And so we were just starting the process of thinking of what would be out there that might be possible for him. And we started by thinking maybe an idea would be to have maybe one or two other people with Jonathan to share a house, and that we would purchase or rent a house. And that got changed along the way, but we're really glad it did. So sometimes plans change, but it worked out for the best for us and for Jonathan, which means everything to us. So that did change, and Jonathan's now in a home of his own with a caregiver 24/7, and he's the happiest we've ever seen him. And we have such great peace of mind knowing that this happened and that we didn't wait, and that we know that we can see this happening now before, while we're still alive, and we can help further the plan. So we're very grateful for that.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Carol said, the wait part of the why wait is it can be a very long wait for someone to actually get into a group home if that was the direction that the plan had. It could be years and years of waiting for something, and then you're really not sure where that group home might even be. So it became clear to us early on that if we could find a long-term residential plan for Jonathan that wasn't through a group home, then we would try to pursue it as actively as possible. What we have done basically is we sold our property, our previous property, which was a single-family home, and we looked around aggressively for a larger property that would be able to have two separate residences, one for Jonathan and his caregiver, and a separate one for Carol and myself. Now, it's a bit tricky to do that because there are bylaws that prevent two homes on one property that aren't attached, where the second home is not attached to the first home. So we had to go through a lot of gyrations. We found a property in Newmarket, basically, that was quite large, had a very large garage workshop in the back. And through discussions and negotiations with the town of Newmarket, we were able to get the appropriate committee variances, adjustments, basically, from the Committee of Adjustments. That would allow us to turn that garage workshop into a residence for Carol and myself. Now, all this took quite a long time. I think we started in 2016, and we finally moved into our new residence around September of 2018. Jonathan actually moved in with his caregiver into the primary home on the property. I think it was in 2017, around the summer of 2017. So for quite a while, we were living in bed and breakfast or staying with friends while the garage workshop was being turned into a home. But it all turned out great in the end, and we really enjoy all living on the same property. Jonathan's very happy. You know, he's about 100 feet from our house. He pops out of his door, comes over and visits us, stays with us on the weekends while his caregivers are off duty. And just is very happy about going back and forth. He's very happy to have his own place, just like our older son. His older brother has his own place to go to. Now Jonathan feels like he's on par. He's got his own house to live in as well. So it's basically a microboard is a not-for-profit corporation, but it's one that has specific rules about the number of directors and that sort of thing. So the microboard, what it does basically is it appoints directors or other types of members that Jonathan knows that these people have an interest in Jonathan's long-term well-being. Be they cousins, his brother, cousins, friends of the family, people that are younger than us. It's really important to have people on the microboard younger than Carol and myself, so that it moves forwards after we've passed on. And the microboard basically will be making important decisions about Jonathan's long-term residential situation. In other words, if we're not here anymore, the board will be basically making decisions like, is this still the best residential situation for Jonathan, or as he gets older, would perhaps be another residential situation be more appropriate? So they would, just be keeping Jonathan's best interests in mind and helping him navigate his way through life. So it gives us kind of peace and comfort that there's a institution that's been put together, that'll help to make the type of decisions that we would have made as Jonathan moves through his life cycle. Basically, in our case, what made the project work was even though Jonathan needs 24/7, Jonathan does need 24/7 care. As he may not make the right decision in case there was an emergency at night. So obviously, providing caregiving all night is a very expensive proposition. Our budget wouldn't have basically been able to cover that. So we entered into an agreement with our live-in caregivers, like a home share agreement. But Jonathan doesn't really need much support at nighttime because he sleeps through the night. But if there was like a low probability case of an emergency, a fire or something like that, or if Jonathan did become sick one evening and he needed like help there then they would be there to help him. So they don't charge for overnight, providing Jonathan with overnight security, and then in return, they have an attractive home share arrangement with us. So it's kind of a win-win on both parties.
We were just very fortunate to go to a church where they really were so accepting and loving of Jonathan, and everyone got to know Jonathan very personally there. It's a very small congregation. And one of the girls there was a friend of mine. She got to know Jonathan for 6 years there, and she's Jonathan's caregiver now. And I know it can be sometimes overwhelming to try to think about how to go about finding a caregiver, but sometimes it's somebody that's right in front of you that you haven't thought of before. So that worked out just because she just is so loving and caring towards him and really has his best interests at heart. So we couldn't have been more fortunate than to find her. And it's amazing that even though that she was thinking of getting married, and we thought that would squash our plans, that ended up being a blessing in disguise, because this fellow, it's hard enough to find a caregiver, but to find somebody who wants to and live with our son and be married and be in the same house was probably something we didn't think would be possible either. But it turns out that this gentleman is just so close to Jonathan, and Jonathan's very best friend, and really cares about him so much that it's been certainly a double blessing for us.
So Kelly, this story really spoke to looking at the voice of the person who we were planning for and around as the driver for the living scenario that they ended up creating. Speak a little bit to Jonathan and what he wanted for his life.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about Jonathan is that the area that they ended up moving to was the area that he was his natural community. He spent a lot of time in that area. He had his favorite activities there. They have great walking paths in that community, and that's one of his favorite things to do. There was, trampolining and rock climbing walls and all sorts of other opportunities that made it the right place for him and a natural place that was his real community, even though his home was somewhere else. So the family basically sold the home and moved to Jonathan's community and purchased a home that had, a space behind it, which then allowed for so many more opportunities for them, one of which was the use of technology. So, the caregiver is wonderful, but they need time off as well. So the hope is, and we have started implementing the use of technology to be the safeguard when and during those times that Jonathan can be home alone, as long as the family is right there, right behind him. So that was one of the big things that we did implement into this model.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And also the sort of the sustainability of owning that home, the space for Jonathan, that's really important to this model.
Yeah, Jonathan loves his own space. And so the space was key. He tended to like his own space, even in his own home prior to this. So having it be a large enough space for Jonathan to move around and having it to be having the two spaces there allowed the family to be close to Jonathan, but not right on top of him. And so the neat thing about this and how they moved towards the two spaces was utilizing the legislation that exists provincially that we talked about earlier. So we know that there are federal and provincial legislation and plans, a strategic plan, a 10-year plan in York Region specifically, that looks at how are we going to increase density to support homelessness. And so the family knew about this and were provided with the legislation and approached the town council with the knowledge that they could then build that secondary home on the same site as Jonathan's home, which is the home that this family lives in. The flexibility for that unit in the future, if and when family decide they don't want to live there, it could be used for a second caregiver to live there and provide backup support. It could be used for his brother to live there and provide the backup support. There's so many possibilities, even collaborations with other families, for example, in terms of providing that as a rental space to another family.
Right, or just rental income for him to continue on the lifestyle he likes.
Absolutely.
Were there any other budget considerations or things that this family did that you'd like to highlight that helped make this achievable?
So you know what? They used their assets that they had. And so they had a family home a little bit south of where this home is located and sold that home and purchased this land and built the new home for the same cost. So really out of pocket, they were about even when it came to, selling one home and buying a new home that ended up being two homes. And so that was one of the biggest things, leveraging your resources, both natural resources as well as financial resources, and your internal resources, your knowledge, your expertise. This family's microboard, they have a microboard, has so much expertise on that microboard, financial knowledge and expertise. I'm on the microboard as a family friend. I've known Jonathan since he was born. So everyone has a different unique strength that they're bringing to the microboard, and that's going to provide a lot of sustainability as well and some flexibility and supports the family and Jonathan in terms of continuing to move along their journey.
That's great. Well, let's hear Earl and Carol's final thoughts on this scenario for their son.
It's been worked out fantastically. I mean, we're able to have a more independent life. Jonathan's able to have a more independent life. And from that perspective, I think it's been great for all of us, basically.
It actually was easier than we thought it would be, just by starting, Yeah.
Yeah. But if we could just leave one piece of advice, like we started this when Jonathan was about, I guess, 28, 29. 29. If families can start as early as possible, when they have as much energy as possible, and to give them as much lead time as possible to work out the best plan, to investigate different types of possibilities before they make a final decision, to start as early as possible and start thinking about different alternatives as early as possible and what the consequences each of those alternatives are. We started pretty late, and you mentioned it was easy, but like we did go through quite a bit with the city to finally allow us to do what we did. So it a lot of nerve-wracking times.
I guess it's a bit like having a baby. You forget about all that when you see the results, right? And so we're seeing the results with Jonathan. Like our caseworker says she's never seen Jonathan so happy and so independent, doing things that she's never seen him do. And she's been following us for the last 10, 15 years. And so that says it all. You know, it's worth every effort to see Jonathan so happy.
And he helps out around the house tremendously, you know, peels vegetables for making dinner, happy to shovel the snow in the driveway.
It's like a pride of ownership. He goes out to shovel the snow because it's his place. And he feels like, as Earl was saying, he feels so happy that he can be like our older son and have his own house. You know, it's special, makes it all worthwhile. So don't wait.
Yeah, don't wait.
So they talk about starting early, Kelly, and I think we can all agree that that's, you know, when we can, that's wonderful. It doesn't always work out that way, but starting to think intentionally about what the future will look like as early as possible can help make things move more smoothly.
Absolutely. Starting early brings so many things. It gives you the opportunity to practice and develop skills. It gives you an opportunity to connect to the right people and gather as much information as you can so you can make informed decisions. Families often ask me, you know, if I were the one planning, when would I start and what would it look like? You know, I think the age of, 6 to 9 when they start school is great. And there'll be different things that you'll be doing along that journey at different ages. But if you start early, knowing that there will be using a vision, right? Using an end goal, at least you're much more prepared.
Several years ago, the provincial government introduced Developmental Service Ontario Housing Navigators, a team of specialists created to provide information, resources, and support to people with disabilities and their families in creating individualized housing plans. With me now is Martha Beach and Alexandra Shannon, DSO Housing Navigators. Welcome, Martha.
Hi.
And hi, Alex.
Hi there.
First of all, could one of you tell me a little bit about the DSO Housing Navigators and what that position entails? Maybe Martha.
Sure, I'd be happy to. The Housing Navigator position was introduced in 2018 across each of the DSO agencies. The core goal of helping people, their caregivers, and support networks to learn about creative, person-centered housing and support options. So there's 7 Housing Navigator positions divided amongst the 9 DSOs in Ontario.
And in what ways do you support people in developing individualized housing plans? Alex?
So Housing Navigators provide information and resources to support planning. We host housing-related webinars and information sessions, and we advocate for the needs of people with developmental disabilities with regards to housing. We developed an online housing toolkit, which was released in the fall of 2019. And within that toolkit, there is a My Housing and Support Plan document that was developed to assist families and their support networks in creating individualized support and housing plans. We've created a 7 to 10 hour workshop series, which provides resources and inspiration and guides people through the process of completing the My Housing and Support Plan document. So our hope is that the workshop series will give people an opportunity to have a starting point to be able to work from there and hopefully bring their housing and support plans to be a reality.
Fantastic. What type of resources do you find most beneficial to families?
So one of the things that we've done, what we found with COVID-19 was that we were unable to meet obviously with people in person. So that prompted us to create more online resources. So we've moved our information sessions online as well as the workshop series, and we have been creating a number of different webcasts that are housing related. So we've done one on technology for independence, to increase independence. We've done one on affordable housing and why people should consider applying for it, as well as a session on inspiring families where we featured the stories of 4 family groups. So 4 family groups that have created or are in the process of creating housing plans for their loved ones.
Martha, you had mentioned earlier that the DSO Housing Navigators are sort of divided up among regions, and I think there's a real benefit to having regional support. I would imagine that you know all about municipal bylaws and new projects and help make connections that really help with people's plans.
Well, we do like to be informed about the municipal bylaws, but there's certainly a lot to learn. For example, understanding which municipalities provide funding and incentives for secondary suites, or which ones are allocating their Ontario Priorities Housing Initiative funds to home ownership opportunities are just a few examples of the information we gather. And we certainly keep abreast of new projects and initiatives in our regions and also provincially that may benefit people with the creation of their individualized housing plans.
Yeah, I think that information is invaluable and a great place for people to start. So Alex, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how someone might connect to a housing navigator individually if they'd like to.
Absolutely. So if anybody wants to reach out to a particular housing navigator in any of the regions, they can go to the DSO website, to the DSO Housing Toolkit, and there is a list located there. I think also there's going to be a list of housing navigators shared with the booklet that has been prepared to complement this session. So they can find that contact information there.
Yes, absolutely. You can take a look at the booklet. Well, thank you both for being part of this segment. I think that's really important information for people and families to have.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. You know, housing is one part of a good life, and a really important part of a good life. But housing is only as good as all the other things that make life great. So how connected are we to our communities? What kinds of relationships do we have? Do we have meaningful opportunities in our day that bring us joy? You know, our home is our place to kind of come at the end of the day to relax and be safe, but it's also a place where we invite other people in to celebrate and to share in our life experiences. So if we don't have a rich life kind of outside of our home, it's hard to make our home that happy place that truly is a home for someone. So I think that we have to think about it as in a greater context. It's not just one piece, which is why through this series that we've really been looking at all pieces that make life good. Certainly, when we consider housing, we have to also think about, you know, who are the people that are going to help us make our home life possible, and that brings in ideas of caregivers, which can be paid or unpaid supports, right? And so, if we have a good, rich life outside of our home life, we're able to draw on some of those natural connections to help make the care and support that we need in our home feasible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the costs are brought down, and plus you have a better quality of life at the end of the day. You're with the people you choose to be with.
Right. As we wrap up, Kelly, I think it would be great if we showed one last video that represents much of what we've talked about tonight. The Oak Park Family Group consists of 8 families who came together to support their sons and daughters to live in homes of their own choice, contribute, and to find roles and belonging in their community. Kelly, these families have inspired some of the work that you do too. Am I right?
Absolutely. I think that this group exemplifies the intentional planning and the thought that goes into developing a good life. And it may start with one family and it continues to grow with collaboration and partnership, and the journey continues to evolve. So this is just such a great example of what planning can look like.
I'm Vicki McCallum.
I'm Karen Alexander, and we're founders of the Oak Park Family Group.
The Oak Park Family Group consists of 8 families, and we all have a son or daughter with a developmental disability. And we've been spending the last couple of years looking for a sense of home and belonging in community for them.
We're working very hard together to create inclusive lives and a sustainable future for our loved ones.
The Oak Park Family Group was started as a result of many sleepless nights. I knew that I needed some support from other families. I knew that I needed resources, and all I knew at that point really was what I didn't want. And I didn't want a group home. I wanted my son to be able to make his own decisions. So I started a family network with just a few people, and it's grown a lot, and we've all been supporting each other since.
Nick was somewhat cocooned into that protective family environment, and we reached a point where we were aging, we were getting to be in our 60s, and with that being said, if something should happen to us, what happens moving forward? And that's what basically led us to where we are today again. It's been a remarkable journey for the 2 years. incredible journey.
What makes this model work, and one of the key components, is making a lot of community connections. So we're building lots of relationships and partnerships with community organizations. Another component that makes it work is having our community facilitator, Eric. He's very instrumental. He's worked with each family in building the vision and plan for their family member on how they want to live in their community. And it's just so instrumental because it makes them more capable and reduces the amount of support they need in the future. What surprised me is that I thought Jacqueline wasn't ready, but in fact, she just hadn't been given the opportunity or experience, and it was her parents that needed to get out of the way.
Something? Yeah, could you tell me where the goldfish are? It's right here. Great. Thank you.
I think it's your own decision. I guess you can decide when you are comfortable, when it's time to find your own, I guess maybe your own place.
So there's been some really incredible progress in terms of growth that individuals have had that are involved with the family group, including, for all of them being a tenant. And then many individuals have improved their employment situation. So whether it's getting their very first job or getting more hours at their current job and expanding their role in their current jobs. So in the community, there's been some really cool roles that people have built as well. So volunteering to help run a food bank, for example, where we have one woman that's started to build a role at a local ski club. There's so much that everyone has to offer. Everyone has their gifts and their strengths, and we can all learn a lot from each other, even if we have differences. So it's a win-win for everyone when everyone's included.
I think without the support of the Oak Park group, we probably wouldn't be where we are today, right now, with Noah living independently. Noah kept on saying that he wanted to live on his own, he wanted to get his own place and have more independence. And we had this opportunity, and he wanted to choose where he wanted to live and who he wanted to live with. And he wanted to be part of a whole community and meet people in the community and just be very inclusive in the community. So we're very pleased with the growth that he's made.
My daily routine is learning how to try new stuff. If I even want to, I can vote my parents out.
Too often, too many of us parents are sitting back. You're thinking of so many reasons as to why it can't work. Don't hold back. If you don't overcome it, and you're going to be 70 and 80 years old, and they're going to be 40 years old, and where are we at now? Don't wait too long. Again, it really comes down to that group support. If you have that group, you've at least got someone to fall back on.
In any community, you need anchors in the community that are your friends and associates and people you can count on to, and places you can go and things you can do. And by living independently, he's developed those on his own.
Because people start, just understanding who he is as a person and respecting him as a human being, and he feels that he has a purpose in the community and in his life.
It's really important with this model that the individuals have choice. So they've had choice where they live, how they want to live, and who they live with, and choice around their roles in community. The most important thing I feel that makes this model work are the 8 families themselves. We're dedicated to having each other's back in the future. We make decisions together, and we get together socially in informal meetings, and we don't feel alone anymore.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Q&A segment of tonight's presentation. First off, I would like to thank Erwin, Carol, and Earl, and Vito and Sandra for sharing their stories. It's so valuable to hear direct